Take you straight to Washington, D.C. now in the U.S., where Africa is under the spotlight today at the IMF and World Bank spring meeting. South Africa's energy crisis and its inability thus far to solve it has been mentioned as one of the biggest factors hampering our economic growth. Now, our reporter Heidi Giokos has been in Washington, D.C. attending those meetings, and she joins us live from there. Now, Heidi, we just had a story now from your colleague Devin Murigan looking at what's being said around this 1.2 trillion rand investment from President Cyril Ramaphosa's big roadshow that he goes on for investment every year. But what does that mean when, Heidi, you've been hearing there that the growth projection for South Africa is at 0.1%? What are they saying behind that rather really a sad number?
Yes, so it's one thing to have all this investment that's been pledged during the President's Investment Conference that aims to bring in that necessary investment for businesses to start up in South Africa, which will ultimately lead to job creation and economic growth. But it's a very different picture when you have the International Monetary Fund saying that we are revising down South Africa's growth projection by negative 1.1%. So for this year, the IMF only predicts South Africa growing at 0.1%. That's basically little to no growth for the South African economy. And the reason for this, the main reason for this, is because the unreliability and of the electricity supply and inconsistent electricity supply that we are seeing in South Africa. The energy crisis is a major obstacle for the South African economy to grow and thrive, for businesses to be able to create those much needed jobs, which ultimately will lead to job creation. There's been a lot of conversation here at the spring meetings about, for example, inflation and how to bring that down, and also looking at interest rates. But the big conversation for South Africa is the energy crisis. They haven't really mentioned a number of other things, such as the financial squeeze, interest rates, and inflation, but mostly the energy crisis. How do we manage that and bring that and bring an end to that, because this is our biggest obstacle. The fact that the IMF is only predicting us to grow at 0.1% just shows you the severity of this. Next year, they are predicting that we could possibly grow a little bit more, but nothing too significant, nothing over 2%. And what's even more alarming, Marcel, is the fact that the IMF has indicated that they did not expect the energy crisis to worsen to the levels that it is at right now. Last year, we possibly saw the worst kind of rolling blackouts that South Africa has ever experienced. We're currently in stage 6 at the moment. It doesn't look like it's going to get any better. The IMF calling for drastic measures to address this in order to boost that much needed economic growth. Let's listen to what came out of the Sub-Saharan Africa report specifically about South Africa's energy crisis.
It is on account of the energy challenges that we've revised down our growth numbers. Whether our numbers prove to be more conservative, too conservative, I mean, time will tell. But when we revise these numbers, I think it's something that we were fairly comfortable with. Sometimes we have differences with country authorities on account of the timing when projections are made. I think our projections came well after the budget numbers had been produced. So maybe that accounts for some of the differences. And then, we'll see where things end up.
Now, Heidi, South Africa's finance minister is also there at these spring meetings, and by the sounds of it, the Afrikaans term comes to mind, hou die blink aan bo. He believes the situation will be brought under control to stabilize Eskom. Is he saying that just because he knows he needs to put up a good and positive front on such a big international stage, or where's this positivity coming from?
Well, the finance minister, Enoch Godongwana, had very tough questions posed to him, especially by international media, around that Eskom exemption that we saw playing out about a week and a half ago, where the finance minister ultimately had to suspend or stop that decision to exempt Eskom from reporting its irregular, wasteful expenditure in its financial report and only in its annual report. So there are many aspects of Eskom that the finance minister had to answer to, that his department is very much involved in. including the fact that National Treasury has decided to take over 200 billion rand of Eskom's debt. So that relief package is obviously going to put a major strain on government's purse. But at the end of the day, it's about stabilizing electricity supply in the country. And the finance minister saying that he believes as though the IMF has predicted and projected the worst case scenario when it comes to the country's electricity crisis. And I said to him, but it's not the worst case scenario because we're already in the worst case scenario. The electricity minister had told us last week that we are possibly going to be short of 10,000 megawatts. And if you look at what's been previously said, 1,000 megawatts means one stage of load shedding. So we're going to be pushed up beyond stage 6. What does that mean for businesses? What does that mean for economic growth? As you heard the International Monetary Fund mentioning just a short while ago, that it's imperative for the government to sort this out, to see that economic growth and job creation. But the finance minister is saying they have it under control and there are certain measures in place to make sure that they sort out the electricity crisis. Whether that's actually going to happen and it's going to be a reality for us, I'm not entirely sure. And before we listen to what the finance minister says, Marcel, I just want to enlighten South Africans. When people started hearing that I was from South Africa, they are so flabbergasted by the fact that we have become so accustomed to having irregular electricity supply and inconsistent electricity supply that they're even more flabbergasted at the Thabo Bester debacle, with one journalist even asking me, is this a joke? When is the joke over? Because I just cannot fathom how this is a true story. And I said, no, it's very true. This is not a joke. But the same kind of sentiment is being projected when it comes to our electricity supply, that this is not normal and our government needs to urgently address this. Otherwise, we are not going to see the much needed economic growth, which is obviously also pulling down the rest of the African continent, because our economic growth is obviously not where it should be. Let's listen to our finance minister.
Look, as things stands, we have guaranteed 250 billion rand of Eskom debt, which other institutions are beginning to pencil into the, and not as a contingent liability, but as the actual debt for South Africa. So that's the first problem. So you've got one way or the other to deal with that challenge of contingent liability. So what we have done is to say, okay, let's reduce that contingent liability by providing 254 billion rand to Eskom. That's the first point. The second point is that in any event, every year we're supposed to be funding Eskom. You are going to be asking us to fund them diesel and so on and so on. It's worth making sure that they've got a clean balance sheet so that they should be able to carry all of their expenditure on their own. So it's some of those challenges that are facing us.
Thank you so much for that. Heidi Giokos reporting to us live there from Washington, D.C., attending the IMF and World Bank spring meetings. Heidi, enjoy the electricity while you can before you head home.